Welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of Theater Journal Shorts. I'm here today speaking with Dr. Rhaisa Williams about her article, Grief Capital, Grief Activism, The Brief Life of Mamie Till Bradley's NAACP Tour, which appears in Theater Journal Volume 76, Number 4, out in December 2024. Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be featuring your work in the latest issue of Theater Journal.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
So, to begin, I was wondering if you could just start by giving a brief summary of the topic of your article and its main argument for our viewers.
Yes, of course. So I'll start with the two main questions that motivated this essay. So the first is, how do institutions and publics simultaneously view Black mothers as exquisite representatives of grief and suffering, and also view them as inauthentic performers of grief to capitalize for selfish reasons? And then the second question is, what conflicts arise when you put grief under contract? So the essay that I wrote for Theater Journal, it expands our understanding of an iconic figure of the civil rights period. So the woman that we come to know as Mamie Till Mobley. But at the time of the events in question, which is what the essay is about, particularly from September to November of 1955, she was known as, or she was married to a man whose last name was Bradley. And so that's how she was referred to, as Mamie Till Bradley. And that's how I'll refer to her throughout this interview, because that's how I refer to her in the essay. So anyway, Mamie Till Bradley, her son Emmett Till was brutally murdered in Mississippi in 1955 for allegedly flirting with a white woman. And he was from Chicago, Illinois, and he was 14, and his mom sent him to Mississippi for a 2-week family vacation. And so two white men, J.W. Millam and Roy Bryant, they killed, they shot, beat, and drowned Emmett Till. And his body was in the Tallahatchie River for 4 days. And so again, this is August, Mississippi, and for 4 days, his body's in the river when his body was finally discovered. And so his body was badly decomposed and horribly mutilated. And in most other circumstances, this would have been a closed casket because of the look of the body, also the stench of his body. However, his mother insisted that there be an open casket for her son, because she wanted the world to see what they did to my boy, to show this deep racial hatred that will cause these men to murder a 14-year-old boy in this way. And so there was a 4-day open casket funeral in Chicago. And she also had media come in to photograph and to record. And so there was a spread about this murder in Jet Magazine, which is a popular Black culture and lifestyle magazine. And they showed his face in the casket. So this is something that, like this image, if you've ever seen it, it really just kind of stays in your mind. And most people, scholars included, they very much celebrate Bradley's bravery in publicizing her son's body for the world to see, because it provided this kind of visual artifact for this hatred and the disease of racism. And it also importantly brought renewed energy to the civil rights movement. And so this publication is what makes Bradley an icon. This is why we remember Emmett Till. Um, this is why we remember Mamie Till Bradley to this day. And people very much cite this as that her allowing people to see her son, that is the activist work that people see, right? Or that she allows people to see her son, and then other people take up the mantle of, and particularly Black men. This is kind of the vision of it, that then organize other people in the civil rights movement to then start, kind of doing all of this incredible work that we know of the civil rights movement. And so people very much stopped looking at Mamie Till Bradley after she allowed people to see her son, right? Like that's kind of the work that she did, and then that's it. But that's not the whole story. And so after her son's murder and funeral, and the funeral was held between September 3rd and September 6th of 1955. Bradley gave a plethora of speeches at churches and rallies throughout the country to bring attention to her son's murder and to fight for justice. And then at the end of September of 1955, Roy Bryant and J.W. Millam, there was a trial held for them in Money, Mississippi. And after 1 hour of deliberation, the all-white male jury found both men not guilty of the murder. And so this also then like really invigorated people. Like they were like, very upset by this. So after the not guilty verdict, the NAACP, which is one of the preeminent Black social justice organizations during the 20th century, organized Bradley's speaking engagements, which also brought renewed energy to the NAACP, which was starting to kind of lose some attention and lose membership and money because it was doing a lot of litigation in the courts to desegregate public schools. And so, we had the huge landmark case of Brown v. Board in 1954 that really riled people up, right, and got people really excited. However, the law is drawn out and it's boring, and it's complicated. And so, you have this excitement for Brown v. Board, but then, it takes a long time for the laws to trickle down to how actions actually happen in real life for people. And so, you know, people have short attention spans, unfortunately, right? And so, however, again, the murder of Emmett Till and how Bradley brought attention to her son's murder gave the public something to really rally around. And so there's this mutually beneficial relationship between Bradley and the NAACP. So they draw up a contract about the speaking engagements. She's to receive honoraria when she does her travel, right? As well as she needs support with her, like, because she's again, her son has just been murdered literally a month prior, right? She sends her son to Mississippi for a 2 week summer vacation, and he comes back a corpse. So she's in the throes of grief. She's also like now on this touring schedule, to try to bring justice to her son, and she needs a lot of support to do this. And so the NAACP, they also cover those costs. And for 6 weeks, this is a really great partnership that works. But then they had this huge falling out that boils down to essentially, is Bradley capitalizing too much from her speaking engagements with the NAACP? So, in other words, is she mobilizing her grief for personal gains? And so there's this, people are questioning her, did you buy homes? Are you buying new clothes, right? Like, what are you doing with this money that you're getting from the speaking engagements? So a lot of these suspicions come from her attempt to renegotiate the terms of her touring contract to cover unforeseen costs that are associated with her ascent into this macabre celebrity, if you will, right? So, such as hospital bills, she suffers from nervous breakdown. Again, her son has just been murdered, right? And all the stress. There's all these operational costs, such as like phone bills, right? Long distance, landlines are the thing, right? And so she's getting calls to her home, her telephone bills are skyrocketing. She's also not working, so she needs, wage replacement, and all this backfired. And the executive director of the NAACP, Roy Wilkins, essentially accused her and told her, "You're capitalizing on your son's death, and we need to end this relationship." So I give all of that background to say, and that's what I talk about in the essay. But all of this, in the essay, I draw on Black press articles, Bradley's account in her 2003 autobiography, The Death of Innocence, as well as these under-examined NAACP board meeting notes during the period to analyze this very understudied NAACP-sponsored grief tour and her public fallout with the organization. And so I argue that turning to the financial substrates of grief, so here being Bradley's attempts to cover the cost of ongoing material constraints, that this cuts through these assumptions that try to forcibly make her into the symbolic mother, right? Where, your son is murdered, and that there's a way that she's kind of supposed to be frozen to the grief of the murder, instead of seeing her as this embodied mother who has to navigate material constraints that either were that began or were aggravated by her son's murder. And so in the essay, one of the things I do is that I forward a concept called grief capital. And this focuses on Black women in institutions and how they both make decisions based on the financial substrates of Black maternal grief. And so I analyzed how Bradley understood and deployed her financial worth to the NAACP, and importantly, in thinking of her as a financial actor. I show how she perceived her shifting financial value to the organization that benefited from its association with her, along with her own growing financial needs that comes from her grief activism and how she really tried to negotiate that for improved conditions for herself.
Thank you. That's all fascinating and a really interesting, I think, rethinking of such an important and horrific moment in our history. It is not a light or an easy topic. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came to this topic.
Yeah. So it started in grad school, where my dissertation was about these different ways of thinking about Black motherhood or Black mothering and self-interest. And so not to think about Black mothers as being self-sacrificial, but like what about Black mothers who also, kind of think about themselves, and how can we think about those two things together, right? And so for the dissertation, I also treated Bradley as this uncomplicated paragon of Black maternal grief, right? That she release these pictures, or not necessarily release pictures, but had this open casket, allowed the media to come in to see her son, and made people face the ugliness of injustices that they may not have wanted to face, right? And essentially, she did it right. She grieved the right kind of way. Um, and she's this model that we all refer to, right? Like, so Sabrina Fulton, who is the mom of Trayvon Martin, names Mamie Till Bradley, but Mamie Till Mobley, as this person that she drew strength from when her son was murdered. Even LeBron James, I believe in, was it 2015 or 2016, his one of his homes in LA had been defaced with a racial epithet, and so he put attention on it. And he said, like Emmett Till's mom, I'm doing this, like Emmett Till's mom, I'm bringing attention to this, right? But while I was in grad school, I was at a conference and I was talking to a historian, and I was just telling him about, like, my interest in Black maternal grief and Black motherhood. And I brought up Mamie Till Bradley. And he was the first to say, well, she fell out with the NAACP. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? So that led me to want to investigate Bradley more, like, okay, wait a minute, I'm probably seeing her in this very simplified way. And then that led me to Ruth Feldstein's chapter on this fallout between the NAACP and Bradley. And that, at least to my knowledge, is probably like one of the only treatments to kind of look into this very kind of contentious moment. And so that's what launched me into this.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's so important to touch upon these different dimensions of the performance of grief and its connections to images of motherhood, but also to the connections between or among intersections among care work as motherhood and these broader questions of how race and racialization factor into that. You've already touched on it a little bit in referencing your dissertation work, but I was wondering if you could also give us a sense of how this particular piece connects to your broader research projects or to what you see as important conversations happening in the field of theater and performance studies more broadly.
So yeah, so I can answer both uh, sets of questions. And so, well, the first is that this article is drawn from a chapter in my book that's under contract with NYU that's on Black maternal grief, and particularly trying to think about Black maternal grief capaciously, in these kind of ways that it may be illegible, or how our beliefs of Black maternal grief actually uh, make us not look at certain, like, other things fall out because it just doesn't make sense with how we think of Black maternal grief. And so, but by Black maternal grief, I mean the ways that racism, capitalism, sexism, they impact Black mothers in particular kinds of ways that makes mothering, um, that impacts how they mother and the kinds of worries that they have. But also, Black maternal grief is kind of this, I guess, a symbol, if you will, right? Because Black mothers in grief also signify importance for other people. And this is where the concept of grief capital comes in, right? And so Black mothers in grief, they hold value for others. And this value is both, this is political value, this can be financial value, right? That there's a way that Black mothers with grief and suffering, it is able to translate something for other people that institutions or other people are able to kind of get some worth from. And it's not to say this is disingenuous, but it's just like this is just kind of the fact of the matter. And, other people can be kind of forthright or a bit more forthright about how Black mothers may signify a value for them. However, Black mothers can't. It's that you are in grief and that it's very much um, divorced from ongoing issues like money, like bills, right? And if Black women or Black mothers bring it up, like, hey, yeah, I've lost wages because of this and I need compensation, then suddenly things are looking suspicious. Like, wait a minute, are you trying to do something with this? Um, and so there are these expectations of grief, and how Black mothers take that role up properly or are seen as suspicious, has always interested me. And so that's a through line through the book and through the other articles that I've written. It basically is just to my larger work. And so thinking about within the field of theater and performance studies, I think that one of the ways, well, there's like two main ways I would say that this article engages with the field. And so thinking about like performance and theater studies gives us a way of thinking about the laboring body in a way that's not secondary to structural issues. And particularly Black performance theory is something that I draw a lot on. And it's something that very much emphasizes theory and praxis and is grounded in these acts of daily living, right? So it's not just about the theory that's kind of abstract and above here, but it's also about how are people making decisions in the minutia of their day to day, and how to also kind of look at that minutia in a way that's not these colorful vignettes, but also like this is a theorization that's happening in the moment. And so this allows me to, kind of think about these issues of housing that, that Bradley has, utilities, right? The tour of, in and of itself, and like these issues with the tour and kind of the financial costs of it. Um, that these are these costs of her having to labor, and that her being in grief does not take her outside of that. There's no kind of special protection or border around her. Like she still has a mortgage. She still has a car note, right? She still has to eat. She still has others that she has to care for. And so the ways to kind of think about labor and these traditions of labor and performance is something that works within this the larger field. I would also say spectacle is really important here as well. Think about particularly theater and performance studies. And so in the article, I engage Bradley through spectacle, right? And this is important because this reverence that we have for Bradley means that we shouldn't think of her in relationship to spectacle, because spectacle is something that's seen as frivolous, as entertaining, right? And spectacle is something that we could very much tie to. You entertain someone, you get some money, right? Like that this is not serious. However, spectacle isn't only frivolous, right? And it does very serious work. And in fact, spectacle is very important to activism. It brings attentions to the causes. It's part of the sustaining force of, of activism. And so in the essay, I zoom in on that to think about the ways that Bradley showed her awareness of spectacle, and how she wanted people her, to see her son, right? And how that works with racial justice and these larger projects of racial justice. And again, this isn't to delegitimize or to say that she was that this is something suspicious, but like this is something that this is just real, that this was happening. And she shows I have this, that she had a deep awareness of this. And not only this deep awareness of spectacle, but also the work to generate and sustain it, right? Like it's not just kind of a one-time thing where her son's body is shown to the public, and then it just kind of does work on its own, right? You need people laboring, and she's part of that laboring force, and how she wants to be compensated for that. And so that's another way that this article is in conversation with theater and performance studies in the larger fields, or the larger fields of theater and performance studies.
Thank you. I find this last point particularly interesting. I also am very interested in spectacle, although in a very different context. I work on modern and contemporary change there. But I think that, what you're pointing to is there are these like very persistent undercurrents in the way that we think about theater or public events as performance, these areas that we regard with suspicion still. So the generating of money, the self-conscious mobilization of spectacle for things that are perhaps otherwise identified as causes that ought to be above somehow the material workings of real life, or the fact that agents are intelligent actors, and that this does not delegitimize, as you said, or undermine the power or the value of these things, but rather are really, really key to understanding how they function, both for the people participating and also for audiences and us today thinking about their legacies and their importance. So thank you for all of that. My last question really is more for our potential undergraduate viewers or people who are coming to this without as much of a background in the particular areas of study on which you're focused. So if you had to identify a few sort of key takeaway points for your piece, or, connections to our moment in theater and performance today, so not the field, what would you say that these are, especially again, keeping in mind viewers who might not be have a baseline familiarity with some of the topics that you're covering in this article?
So yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one is, this goes back to the earlier question, or the question I said about the main point of the essay, is what happens when we put grief under contract. And um, that there is this conflict that happens there where a contract offers predictability, and there are certain unforeseen events, and these are predicted unforeseen events. Like, so in the event that this happens, this is how we will handle this thing, right? So you have someone who was in grief, who is kind of in part of their 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 purchase, or the reason for them kind of being brought in as a representative, is because they're representative of this traumatic event. And so we put this under contract where, we have the repetition of touring schedules where you need to show up at a certain time, show up at certain points, kind of keep retelling the story over and over, right? Do all this emotional labor, but also emotional labor is not, again, separate from physical work, right? And financial decisions. And then you have grief that actually does not care about contracts. It doesn't care about time. It's not, there is no, I mean, we have this larger belief in particularly the US, or I guess, or in Western medicine, about the 5 stages of grief. But, and it kind of gives the idea that grief starts this way and then goes here, it goes here, it goes here. But it doesn't. It's very messy. It's very circular. It goes all over the place, right? And so these two things come into conflict with each other. And so that's one of the takeaways of when we have grief activists, or people who are doing a lot of kind of this like emotional activist work, right? How perhaps the bringing that with business transactions are ways that may possibly collide, and how that then may make the person who's an activist be seen suspiciously, and like maybe we should kind of question that. So that's thing number one, and it's something that we see even today when we think about like Black Lives Matter, and one of the co-founders, Patrice Con-Colors, who was accused of, like, oh, you bought homes in these secluded nice neighborhoods in LA, and so you must have been using the money from Black Lives Matter in a suspicious kind of way, right? And it's like, well, why is that the instant? Why do we instantly go there, right? So that's one of the things that I want of a takeaway. I think also this article, really kind of help us think about icons and representatives who we are made to see in relation to certain kinds of causes, that actually prevents us from being able to see them holistically and as people who have ongoing needs. And so I hope that this article helps us to see Mamie Till Bradley, who remarried and then becomes Mamie Till Mobley, more complexly. Her role was not only constrained to making, or it was not only is not limited to making Emmett's body visible for the public, right? But she was also out there laboring to ensure that people didn't just see the picture of her son, be bothered by it, and then move on to something else, but that they did something with that rage and disgust. However, she also struggled to get these same people to see her as a laboring subject in the throes of grief, who needed support to do the very work. And she was cast aside from the public eye for decades until the 1980s. So this is something else that I hope that people are able to take away from this essay.
Thank you so much for all of that. And thank you for your time, especially at this busy time of the semester. For our viewers, one more time, that is Dr. Rhaisa Williams. Her essay, Grief Capital, Grief Activism, The Brief Life of Mamie Till Bradley's NAACP Tour, appears in Theater Journal, Volume 76, Issue 4, on Care Work, and Performance, which is out in December 2024. So once again, Dr. Williams, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chun. Thank you so much for having me.